Hello and welcome to this Ranger 4 webcast. Today's webcast will look at UrbanCode and Jenkins. The webcast will be brought to you by Mark Roberts from IBM. If you have any questions, please enter them in the question or chat feature and we'll answer them at the end. For now, I'll pass you over to Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webcast, as Tejinder has just said, on UrbanCode Deploy and Jenkins. What I plan to do today is go through some slides just at the very beginning, and then I'll be jumping into a machine that's running UrbanCode Deploy and Jenkins and a few other bits and pieces, and take you through what I set up in the last few days as a sort of demonstration environment to show you this in a very simplistic way. The environment we're going to be using actually was built yesterday from nothing, so it's a very simple Jenkins environment. Brand new, not a great deal of content in there, but that serves to illustrate really just, the specific things that have been added for what we're trying to do today. And we'll come to that in a few minutes. But first off, I want to run through a few slides to introduce UrbanCode Deploy, introduce what we're trying to achieve with this particular session and this particular technology, because I suspect many of you on the call today are familiar with Jenkins, and that may be what's brought your attention to join us this afternoon. But I'm assuming that some people don't know UrbanCode Deploy that well, so we'll give an introduction to that as we go through. Now, in terms of DevOps, really as a principle, what we're trying to do is get smaller units of change out to our customers as quickly as we possibly can, taking ideas from the line of business, pushing that out to customers, and getting rapid feedback from those customers in a very short period of time. So the days of creating huge specification documents that define the software that we're going to create, and then implementing that and discovering several months later that it's not entirely what we originally were supposed to do, those days have gone. And agile development has taken some great steps forward in helping us to get the business more engaged, to get smaller units of change in front of our customers much more quickly. But what we often find is that there's elements of waste still within the life cycle process that we go through from an idea to running that idea in production. And as indicated at the bottom, there's a lot of non-value added activities that take place. There's a lot of time that goes by when actually nothing is going on and no one is doing anything particularly constructive. We're waiting for someone to look at an email. We're waiting for someone to find a task in their task queue to do something. So accelerating that process forward and removing the waste and speeding things up are all great things that can be done to mean that we shorten that cycle from an idea to getting in front of a customer. So in a very simplistic life cycle, going from left to right, we've got the development activities that many of you are probably engaged with today. Collaborative development using a common source code management platform and a task-based system. That could be Rational Team Concert, it could be Jira, it could be yellow stickies on the wall, it could be a list in an Excel spreadsheet. But it's a list of activities, an identification of the work that is to be done by the development team, generally broken down into small units that can be achieved within a particular iteration. Now, weaving into that process, we then need to bring in continuous testing to make sure that our application does what it's supposed to do in terms of functionality, in terms of performance, in terms of security. And weaving those into that collaborative development process and weaving those activities into a build process improves that life cycle and shortens the amount of time from developing some content to actually having it tested through a life cycle and validating whether or not it's done what it should or whether we've got rework to do. Now, extending that forward and thinking about this term DevOps that gets overused a little bit these days, to be perfectly honest, I think. But moving more into that DevOps space is thinking about how we get our applications deployed more quickly, how we work together with our operations teams to make sure that we can deploy our applications quickly into various different runtimes environments. And it is often a whole new world because it will be different technologies that developers may not be traditionally that au fait with. There could be load balancers, firewalls, distributions across a wide variety of different technologies. And as a developer, you might be deeply engaged with one particular technology, but not the whole stack of technologies that are used to deploy the application. So there's a huge need for operational people who have that understanding and that expertise across the runtime environment into which we want to deploy, bringing these communities together and trying to make this a more continuous process such that we get that feedback from our customers much faster is all to the good of development. And that's a great place where we can take a lot of waste out of the process as well. Lots of meetings that can be removed if we can make a lot of these operations more automated, more streamlined, and things that we can run more frequently. So we want to do more deployments as we go through the life cycle, because not only does that break down the unit of change into smaller pieces, which are easier to test and easier to be rock solid confirmed that they are doing what they should, but equally it's a means of exercising the deployment process that we have for our application and generating the confidence in that deployment process so that we are happy to use that deployment process straight into production. And we get away from this notion of production's different, so it has to have a different deployment process. So we need to implement a smooth delivery pipeline transition of value from left to right, with traceability looking the other way from right to left. And I've worked across different areas of this life cycle for many years now. And traditionally we go through the development activities, we check our code into a source code management system. That then initiates some sort of build activity, probably with Jenkins for 99% of the people on the call today. And then we have to pass that over as a package of content that needs to be deployed. And that's an area where there's quite often a bit of waste. So if we can take something out of that packaging and deploy operation and get the build operation going straight forward through that process and deploying into our first test environment, then we've taken some steps out of the process, speeded things up, and we have our software much more quickly into a really demonstrable environment. Because just generating a WAR file or a jar file doesn't really tell us a great deal about how it's going to run. We only know that when we've deployed it, and we only really know that once we've deployed it and exercised it within at least our first environment, and then hopefully pushing it forward at some speed through various testing activities, ultimately till that version gets deployed into production. So that's what we're trying to achieve with this, and we're going to use UrbanCode Deploy and Jenkins to do that. Now, in my example, starting off on the left-hand side there, I've got a very simple development process. I'm going to make a very, very minor change to an application in a few minutes. The source code management system I'm using today is Git, primarily because I suspect that's what many of the people on the call are using today. So we have a nice line of 3 applications really in line, which is Git for the source code management, Jenkins for the build process, UrbanCode Deploy for the deployment operation, and the runtime environment I'm using today happens to be the WebSphere application server. So we're trying to keep a nice streamlined approach to this delivery pipeline. Some challenges that we often see is that developers creating daily builds, but a QA team with a 3 to 5 day cycle time. Now developers are probably creating builds much more rapidly than that. For their own purposes, and some of those will go forward for deployments into an environment. But a 3 to 5 day cycle time for a QA team is much too long, so we need to find out ways to reduce that if we can. And some of the bottlenecks really come through a lack of deployment automation and the manual steps that teams need to go through to deploy applications, ticket-based and manual environment provisioning, whereby people actually submit a request for an environment, and an environments team get around to looking at that ticket at some point, and then they go ahead and start to create that environment. And that will take time. There might be some to-in and fro-in on that ticket to understand exactly what environment they want, but ultimately it will get handed over, and then there'll be a manual handover from the build team to a deployment team who are going to actually deploy the application into a runtime. After all those things have happened, we can then start to test our application in some sort of demonstrative environment. Now, deployed middleware and infrastructure changes can be a big source of a bottleneck for a lot of deployment automation. And the adoption of DevOps really has accelerated the change, the speed of information flow through It's accelerated the speed of application delivery. And one of the reasons for that is that we are breaking down units of change into smaller pieces. And that's great. We get these tiny little increments of functionality flowing through. We want them deployed. We want them tested. We want confirmation that they are doing what they should. But middleware changes are generally fairly complex, take a little bit more time and consideration because we are making some significant structural changes to the platform upon which our application is running. And as a result, they often require a lot of coordination across multiple people through different technologies. When we move further down the stack, making infrastructure changes is an even bigger headache. And there's a sort of widening scope of reluctance to make changes in these areas. People are happy for application changes to go through because that will mean that the business application that you create is changing, is adding value, is removing defects, and that's all to the good. People want that. But middleware configuration and infrastructure changes are often looked upon as a little bit of a headache, and as a consequence, there's more of a reluctance to make those sorts of changes. They're more complex, so that adds to the reluctance to make those changes. So moving things into a process where we have more manageable middleware, where that's taken care of for us by the deployment automation, where the infrastructure changes can be automated for us as well, now that starts to become much more attractive. And there are lots of things that we can do in those areas. So the final slide, I think, really today, before we dive into a virtual machine to have a look at this stuff running, is to give you a quick introduction to UrbanCode Deploy. Now, this is a deployment automation product. It does exactly what it says on the tin, and it will deploy an application for us. And the application is the first thing you need to think about, really. What is the application that you're deploying? Is it a banking application? Is it a mortgage application? Is it to process car insurance? What is it? Or is it an internal HR system, an internal expenses system? Whatever it is, it's an application that delivers value to the end user. And it's made up of a number of components, and those components typically reflect different technologies that are involved in the deployment activity. So component one might be a jar file, which is to be deployed on WebSphere, on Tomcat, on WebSphere Liberty, on JBoss, on whatever type of platform you wish to deploy it on. Component two might be a series of SQL scripts for making database manipulations, or it could be some static web content, or it could be a F5 load balancer that needs to be configured. There's various different technologies through that vertical stack of content and different technologies that you can think of that make up your application. So we break them down into those different technology tiers, into different component tiers. And each of those components has a process. And those processes are quite detailed in that they describe the specific operations that we're going to perform on those components to deploy that particular technology. So it might be stopping the service, undeploying, redeploying, starting the service, reconfiguring, all sorts of different activities, the fine-grained things that you might be doing today in scripted operations. And we build those up in simple building blocks, as you will see in a few minutes' time. The component also has a number of properties. Properties are really important to UrbanCode Deploy, and we spend a lot of time talking to customers who are new to the product or investigating the product. We spend quite a bit of time talking about how we're going to manage the different properties, where they need to go, and what purpose those properties will serve. So we will have component-specific properties. We'll also have application-specific properties. But there might be some of those component properties that vary per environment. So we have the notion of component-specific environment properties. Database URLs is the greatest example of that, because a database URL for connecting our Java application to a database will be different between development, our system integration test, pre-production, and production. We probably don't have a single database that's shared across all of those environments. So you can start to see where properties and parameters come in. Now, particularly important to today is the fact that our components have different versions of the content that is to be deployed. And UrbanCode Deploy has a binary artifact store, which will host the versions of the content that we wish So in this example, we're going to make a change to a Java application. We're going to build that application with Jenkins. The end result of that will be some deployable content, and that deployable content will be moved into UrbanCode Deploy and pushed into a new version of one of the specific components that we're dealing with today. So there's a variety of ways that you can get versions of content into UrbanCode Deploy. You can push it in using something like Jenkins. You can push it into UrbanCode Deploy just using the Ant scripts within an Ant task. You can just use a command line, or there are ways that you can point UrbanCode Deploy at a specific location and have UrbanCode monitor it and pull in new versions of content as they appear. There are different source content providers. Another conversation we have with customers very early on when we're looking at UrbanCode really is, where are we going to get the content from that we wish to deploy? What is the process for generating that content, and how are we going to interact with that particular system? And 99% of the time, the answer to that is, well, it's Jenkins produces it. So that's why we're doing this session today. Now, on the application side, the application itself has a process as well, but that's really an orchestration layer process, which describes the order that we want to execute certain operations on those components. So in an ideal world, if we have 20 components to deploy, we'll deploy all 20 at the same time, and the product's quite happy to go and do that. But equally, there might be some things that are sequenced. There might be things that be broken down into fairly complicated component processes, and we might have 2 or 3 or 4 of those, and that's fine. And we'll sequence those operations with the application process within the application area. The last thing to mention on here really is the environment, and the environments are listed underneath the application, and they identify the route that we're going to take for our changes through to live. So in this example here, we're going from a development environment, which is just a single server, very simplistic. We then go into the system integration test, pre-production, and then production. And the environments become more complicated and more feature-rich and more broken down in terms of their functionality as we go through from development to production. And that's what we always expect, but the processes that we develop at the top of the screen there for the components and the applications do not change as a result of the fact that the environments are actually different. The fact that we are deploying component 1 to a single server in development, and then we deploy component 1 to 2 servers in our production environment is irrelevant as far as the processes go. It's simply a mapping of components to resources in the environment. And you control that, and that then has a knock-on effect as to when the deployments run and where the deployments run. So enough of that. Let's move on now. I think that is the end of the slide. Let me just check. Yes, it is. We're not finished quite yet. So I'm going to jump into a virtual machine now and start to take you through what has been set up in this environment. So this is a very simple Jenkins server, straight out of the box, fresh yesterday. And one of the things that we've done to add UrbanCode Deploy connectivity to this particular Jenkins environment is to add the plugin. And if I go to manage plugins, you'll be able to see the installed plugins that we have. So we've got a Git plugin that was added to get the Git connectivity for our source code management. And we have IBM UrbanCode Deploy plugin. It gives me the option to downgrade that to an older version. That's because I installed version 1.01 first and then discovered that there was a newer version, so I installed the newer version. But this one is added not by going to the available site and listing the myriad of different plugins that are available. It's actually installed by downloading a plugin from the UrbanCode Deploy website, going to the Advanced tab, and then uploading the plugin using this, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. If we go to the plugin on here and just click this, it will take us through to the UrbanCode Deploy plugins website, which is on DeveloperWorks. If you want to have a look at this list of plugins now or later on after the call, literally just Google for UrbanCode Deploy plugins. That's all you need to do. Plugins spelled like this. And then you will see the list of plugins that are available. If you click on UrbanCode Deploy, you will see that we currently have an ever-growing list. There's 132 plugins there. There was 120 last week, actually, so they're growing all the time. And in here, you can filter for specific plugins, go to that site, and then just go and download the plugin from here, and that will download the HPI file that you need to install that plugin into Jenkins. It's as simple as that. There are lots of other plugins available, different types of plugins as well. The Jenkins one is described as a source code management plugin because it is supplying source content into UrbanCode Deploy. Various other source plugins that we have are, we have direct connectivity for Git and for Subversion, TeamCity, Rational Team Concert, and various others. But if you look down this list, you will see different plugins that cover things like database connectivity for executing database scripts to manipulate databases. We have application servers for WebSphere Liberty, WebSphere Application Server, Microsoft IIS, Oracle WebLogic, lots and lots and lots of plugins available, and a good list of things to look through there. We also have, and the last thing I'll mention on here actually is issue tracking. We have issue tracking plugins here for things like Jira, Rational Team Concert, TFS Work Items, and Rally as well. So that will allow you to create new issue tracking tickets as part of your deployment processes. So let's go back to Jenkins, and after installing that plugin, the next thing we need to do is to configure the system and create the connectivity between Jenkins and UrbanCode Deploy. Now down here we have the UrbanCode Deploy server section. Very simplistic. You just take the UrbanCode Deploy URL, and this is a default URL ending 8443. Put in the user ID and a password, and you can then test the connectivity and see that it shows up as successful. We have connectivity between Jenkins and UrbanCode Deploy. Very simple. The next thing we have to do is we go to application we wish to build, and let's go and have a look at the configuration of that. Now this is very simplistic and build project. It's actually building the JKE banking application, which some of you might have come across. If you've ever looked at Rational Team Concert, you might have seen a sample application called JKE Banking. And it's very simple. It just uses ANT to do the build. We're going to build all targets. We specify a couple of libraries for some additional bits and pieces that are required. And then down here, we have a post-build action step. So if you scroll right to the bottom, you can add post-build actions. We have one called Publish Artifacts to UrbanCode Deploy, and that's the one that's listed here. So that's how you add it in and generate this particular block of content in here. So we identify the UrbanCode Deploy server that we wish to connect to, and obviously you can have multiples in there if you need to. You can use a different user. I don't know what would happen if we took out the user credentials actually from the Jenkins server configuration. I guess that would mean that people would have to fill them out here and tick this box. But that might be quite useful if you've got different teams of people and you want to have each team using a different user ID to create the new content in UrbanCode Deploy. We then identify the UrbanCode Deploy component. So that was the box that was at the top left, in the top right, sorry, in the grey earlier on. And that's the thing that we are going to use to deploy this content. We then identify the base artifact directory. So under the workspace, there will be a build directory created. And under that, there will be a file called jke.zip. And that's what we're going to pull into UrbanCode Deploy. The version identifier is just going to use the Jenkins build number. That's quite straightforward. We could put additional annotations onto this particular area if we wished to add additional text, but I'm going to keep this nice and simple and use the build number. Now it's going to run this every couple of minutes. The Git polling will scroll through. Last run at 2:27 today. So what I want to do is show that from a developer making a change and making a commit of the code, it will go right the way through, build it, push it into UrbanCode, and do the deployment. And then once we've talked through that, I'll then go into UrbanCode Deploy and show you some of the things that it's executed. I'll also show you exactly how it's run some of those things. Now, the application that we're going to deploy is this JKE banking. Very simple application, but what you can see, just dismiss that, is what you can see is that the copyright notice is a little bit out of date at the bottom of the screen there. So that's the thing that we're going to change today. Find the right command window. There we go. Just get rid of that one. Okay, so I'm just going to make a very simple change to this. I'm just going to do edit. There we go. There's a bit of text I want to change at the bottom. So it's 2015 now. So I'll save that. And then what I want to do is use git. And I'm going to do a git commit. And then I'll do a git push to push it onto the server. So that's all happened now. So as a developer, I'm kind of going to forget about that. We've got to do a little bit of a song and dance routine for a second while we go through and watch this polling to see this pick up the task. I think we can connect those a little bit tighter together to make Git effectively notify Jenkins as and when changes occur. But at the moment, for simplicity, I've got this one set up just doing the monitoring every couple of minutes to see when a build has taken place. So I'm going to hang around on this screen just for a second and watch that, because I want to watch this build as it actually runs through. It's going to generate build number 28, and we'll see that generate new content in UrbanCode Deploy as we push through. So let's just go and have a look, just prove there is no smoke and mirrors here. Let's go to our component in UrbanCode Deploy, look at the versions, and we currently have version 27 listed there. So there we go. It's found changes, so the Git polling has kicked off. Our build is now running, so let's go into that build and have a look at the console as that build runs. So it's now compiling the code, and it's generated our final deployable output file there, our jke.zip. That's complete. It's now created new version number 28 in UrbanCode Deploy, and it's pushing the content into UrbanCode Deploy. It's actually now carrying out the deployment. So if we go and refresh this window, we can see version 28 has appeared, and I have to be quick here to go through to the dashboard, and we see that we have a running deployment in process. And if we go and have a look at this, and I'm going to slow this down, but things are running away at the moment. So we'll pause here for a second and have a look at what's going on. So if we look in Jenkins, we can see that it's still spinning away at the bottom of the screen because our deployment request is still running. So, and we can see the result of that over here is that our deployment is now progressing through the steps. And I'm going to show you in UrbanCode Deploy the steps in the designer tool in a second or two so that we can draw breath and actually catch up with where we are. But everything happens quite quickly there, so we have to run around quite quickly. Now, if we go back to our application process here and look at the manifest, we can see that it's deploying this with version 28 of our JKA banking application. It also lists a few other things there as well, but these things haven't changed in version. So the IBM Installation Manager, WebSphere Application Server, and WebSphere FixPack, they haven't changed as a result of this, but if they had, and new versions of that content have been created and pushed into UrbanCode Deploy, say a new FixPack had come out, then that's fine. That will be picked up as well and will be automatically rolled out within this deployment at the same time as deploying my application as well. I go back to the log and have a look at this and show you some of the characteristics of this as we progress through. Now, don't worry too much about that failure. I'll explain that in a second. But the first thing that this component process does, cleans the working directory, and then it downloads the artifacts that we are deploying. If I click on this little blue window here, it tells us that we have an out-of-date file, and it downloads our jke.zip. So that's the process of extracting that content from the binary artifact store within UrbanCode Deploy and pushing it out onto the target machine that we wish to deploy to, which is a completely different computer running in this particular virtualized environment on this machine today. We then expand that zip file, so we will explode that bit out and we'll put the content into JKE Banking Expanded, and then we go through a process of checking whether the application is installed, and the answer is yes, JKE is already installed. So then we have to say, is the application running? And it is running. So we then go and stop the application from running. We uninstall the old application. We then install the new application. If we look at the detail here shown in this window, we can see that our application has been installed successfully. We then wait for the application, because WebSphere sometimes has to federate out applications into various different systems from a deployment manager, and that can take a little bit of time. So we wait for the application to be fully deployed, and then we start our application from running. So there we go, it started it on that particular server on that particular node. So our application is now running, and just testing this out now. The proof is in the pudding. Just go and do a refresh on that particular window, and our copyright date, which probably will be coming through quite difficult there on your screens, but trust me, that does say 2015. So we have deployed a new version of our application just from having a developer commit their changes into Git, and that's been successfully deployed. So what do we do there in terms of UrbanCode Deploy? Let's just go back and step over those steps for the next couple of minutes and have a look at that. So if we go into our JKE Banking component, we can see that within the component we've got a number of tabs of information across here. And one of those tabs is versions. And these are the versions that have been created. We can see the date and time that this one was created. Just turned 2:30 today, 5 minutes ago. We can click into that version and we can see the content that is available for us to download, 25 megabyte file. So that's the version that we've just created. Then if we look at the process, we can see that we have a process for deploying the application component to WebSphere application server. And in here, this is that process. I modified it yesterday and took a few things out. I should have probably moved these things down to take up that bit of slack space. Let me just do that to make it look a little bit better. There we go. That's what they should look a bit more like. So this is our deployment process, and it literally is a case of building blocks in a little bit like a flowchart-driven approach to do exactly what we want. We have a palette over here on the left-hand side of the different functions that we can perform. So if we have a look, for example, under application servers, we've got Tomcat, WebSphere, WebSphere Liberty. So in the WebSphere, we've got deployment. And we can do a number of things to a WebSphere environment. There's a lot that we can do, but let's just say that we wanted to stop an application from running. We literally just drag that over onto the drawing surface, and then we fill out the details of the application name, and then save it, and that step has been created. And then we literally drag and drop lines from there to there, and we've just created a new part to the process. In fact, if I do that, so we'll go download, stop application 2, and then expand the zip. I'm not going to save this, so I can chop and change around this as much as I like. We have other different things that we can do on Tomcat. We've got, as you might expect, a slightly reduced list of things that we can do, but we can deploy an application, we can undeploy, we can start apps, and start and stop Tomcat itself. In fact, for another example that we did on another webcast with Ranger 4 a few weeks ago, we showed how you can install Tomcat and put a specific version of a Tomcat instance onto a server, run it, deploy an application to it, do some tests, and then tear it all down again afterwards. So there's a lot of things that we can do very, very quickly and very easily with the automation that we have. If we go up to our application and have a look at our JKE Banking application, the first thing that we see is the environment that we are deploying into. And if we open that up, we can see within that environment, I've deployed WebSphere Application Server, the IBM Installation Manager. So we've actually installed the middleware with UrbanCode Deploy. The machine that we're using, that I changed to up here in this other virtual machine, generally I chop and change and just delete everything off this machine with UrbanCode Deploy as it happens, tidy it all up, clean it all down, and then I'll deploy out new middleware such as WebSphere Application Server. For some things that we're doing, I might need a fix pack on. I might want to try it without the fix pack. I might want to try different versions of WebSphere. That's fine. Deploying all that middleware out using UrbanCode Deploy and taking just a few minutes to do it is a great way to operate. If I go to the history here, you can have a look at the process for deploying WebSphere Application Server and our application. And that whole thing, sorry, that one was too quick. That was one where it skipped a few of the steps. Try and find one that is real. I think it was this one. There we go, 6 minutes and 2 seconds to deploy WebSphere Application Server, create a profile, and install WebSphere Application Server Fix Pack as well. The Fix Pack there taking 3 minutes. That's the longest part of the process. So it's a very quick process, and this is a great way that UrbanCode can manage the versions that we have created and manage the versions that we have in each environment. If I go to a different application, then you can see that in this one, actually, we've got 4 environments in our route to live, going through development, test, pre-production, and production. And if I open these up, I can see the versions that have been deployed into each. I can see which ones are compliant and which are not. Non-compliant means that we've tried to deploy into that environment and we haven't been successful for some reason. We can see, again, the same thing in these test environments. So this one needs a little bit of a tidy up. But you can see how it is very easy to see what's in each environment, what has been deployed successfully, what hasn't been deployed successfully, and not only to see the versions of the content, but to see the versions of the properties as well that have been deployed into each of those environments and to compare them as well. So from a Jenkins point of view, this one will now show that we have finished successfully. It tells us how long the deployment took. In this case, it was 210 seconds. What's that? Just 3.5 minutes. And it tells us it finished successfully. So one of the great things about this is that Jenkins is monitoring that deployment operation. It hasn't just cast it off and forgotten about it. It is monitoring it. So if we do start having any deployment problems, then those will show up within our Jenkins dashboards over here. We'll start to see those down here showing up as any errors. As you can see here, things have gone a little bit wrong during developing the process and getting it going at the beginning, but ultimately it stabilizes out into a consistent approach. Now, one of the things that showed, just to wrapping up now in the last couple of minutes, one of the things that shows really is that from the Jenkins process that we have within here, we have the ability to push content into one component in UrbanCode Deploy. But you might have a very big build process that builds content that really ought to go into different components because it's different technologies, it's deployed differently, there are just different things you need to do. Well, that's not a problem at all because there are other ways that we can push content into UrbanCode Deploy. The Jenkins way is really nice shown on here, but equally we can just put commands into our AMP build process and create different AMP tasks and different AMP targets, basically, that would push the content into UrbanCode Deploy and initiate a deploy if we want to. The one thing I'm not sure if I showed actually on here was how Jenkins initiates the actual deployment operation. Down here at the bottom, I know I got as far as talking about this part. I don't think I actually talked about this bit at the bottom. So this here is ticking the box to say that we want Jenkins to initiate a deployment into an environment as a result of this particular new version of content being available. So it's going to run, the application it's going to run for is JKE Banking. So we can flip across to that in here. So this is our JKE Banking application. The next thing we identify within Jenkins is the environment, which is development. And the next thing we identify is the application that we want to run. So the application process is shown over here. And this one that we ran was just a very simple deploy application. So it's just going to go and run that particular process within the one component that we have there. So it's a very simple process of pushing the content into the component that we wish to deploy and then calling a particular process from UrbanCode for the application to carry out the deployment. Very simple to set up, very easy to use, very easy to manage, but ultimately this fills one of the gaps that a lot of organizations have today, which is how to go from generating the built objects in a build tool such as Jenkins and how to get that deployed into an environment and then manage that through the life cycle. There's lots of operations that we can do, lots of additional things that we can do from Jenkins to call out to UrbanCode Deploy, to execute command line operations, to ask it to create things like snapshots, to ask it to deploy into another environment, and so on and so on and so on. So there's lots of ways that we can extend this process forward. But trying to keep to time and trying to finish this at 1:45, so we've got some time for some questions if we have any. We're generally trying to keep these things to around about sort of 40-45 minutes. I'm going to see now if Tajinder has any questions for us today, whether any have come in on the chat. We'll see whether she wants to open it up for questions now.
We've only had one so far, Mark. It's, can UrbanCode interact directly with Git or other source management systems to get content that is not generated using the build process using Jenkins?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. On the component, one thing that I didn't show you actually was, if we go back to this component here, the one we've been using, go to the configuration for the component, we have on a component by component basis a source configuration type. And this is how UrbanCode gets the content into that particular component. Now on this one, nothing is selected because we're not having UrbanCode go out and get content from a source code management system or from a particular location. In this instance, we are pushing content into UrbanCode Deploy by hand. So we're using more of a push than a pull. But if we wanted to use a pull mechanism, then these are the different types that we have. So we can connect to Git, fill out some information about where the Git repository is, what branch we want, what files we want to include, and so on and so on. And then it will monitor that Git environment, looking for new content on that branch and pull that in as a new version if we wanted to. The other one that I quite like that customers use a lot is called file system versioned. And in here, I just specify a directory. So if I call this opt media JKE banking. Now, any directory I create under that location, such as /1.0, /1.1, that becomes the version identifier. And the content under that location then becomes the actual content that is brought in. So the full path really for what we had earlier on would look something like this. I'll just paste this in here. So that's the location, that's the version identifier, and that's the actual file we want to bring in. So with it monitoring the /JKE banking, the base location, if we had this sort of content here, we'd get a new version called version 26, and the file version that brought in would be jke.zip, brought into there. Others that we have are Subversion, Rational Asset Manager, Maven, TeamCity, Foundation Server, and we also have the option to push content in there from any location. And I'm just going to cancel that now because I don't want anything selected for that particular one. So others that we have are set up like this, where we've got on basic settings. On this one here, we've got this one doing the file system version. So in this particular demonstration environment, I have something similar to what we were just sort of mocking up in that other component. So hopefully that answers that question. Any more questions coming from anyone?
No, that seems to be it, Mark. Thanks, Mark, for that great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and we'll be sending out the recorded version of that webcast later today. Thank you for attending today's webcast. Bye for now.